content. So please do stay in the room if you're able to, stay online, or if you're just joining us now, thank you and welcome to the last bit of the meeting. We've heard some great stuff and we've got some great stuff to come. So the next speaker is a colleague who's worked with us as an intern at Centre for Mental Health, and you know, he's been absolutely brilliant. He comes from a kind of neurological research background, so quite different from the kind of sociological end of things that I'm used to. But I think it shows the value of and the breadth of mental health and public mental health, to have all these different kind of disciplines, everything from the biology and the neurology to the sociology and the economics and all the rest of it, because we're a big functional family on a good day, and it is a system, as we've mentioned a few times. And part of making the system work, as Jackie and others have said, is understanding what it is that we're dealing with.
I'm sorry.
It was going so well, then it all went a bit Pink Floyd. Echo comes down. Yeah, part of the way that we make the system work is by understanding the issues, the challenges, the nature of our population, what they look like, how much money they've got, what their housing's like, what are the risk and protective factors in our communities that are going to support them or challenge them to live their best lives and have the best mental health that they can possibly have. And we also talked about the role of health and wellbeing boards, and some of that's brought together in joint strategic needs assessments, which sounds really technical, and it is technical, but there's a place for bureaucracy. As I'm here in a civic centre, you know, maybe this is the place to talk about bureaucracy. But bureaucracy can be a good thing, right? If it's done well and it's effective, when it works with people and communities and listens to them and presents their experiences and their challenges and the factors that make them well or less well, then when we understand that and we understand what the evidence is about how we support people to have the best outcomes, then we can make better policy decisions, we can make better commissioning decisions, we can spend our money more wisely with and within our communities. And part of the means of doing that is, as I say, a joint strategic needs assessment, which Callum will now come on and explain more about. And basically what Callum's done in conjunction with our work doing a mental health joint strategic needs assessment for Birmingham and Solihull is that he's refreshed the work that Andy did in 2016, which was, what does a good mental health joint strategic needs assessment look like? So I haven't used all your content because as a recovering politician, I never know when to stop talking, do I? It's always my problem. But I will sit down now and hand over to Callum. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Ed. And also, I'm glad to be here as a representative of bureaucracy. We're gonna...
Yay, bureaucracy.
Woo! Yeah, my name's Callum. I am lucky enough to have just completed an internship with Centre for Mental Health. It's been one of the best things I've done. And I've also had a lot of opportunity to work on the Mentally Healthier Councils Network and on these joint strategic needs assessments. And today I'm going to talk about some of the lessons I've learned and try and give some guidance, as Ed said, about how to do a good joint strategic needs assessment, specifically focused on mental health. And I'll probably use the term joint strategic needs assessment and mental health needs assessment interchangeably. I think they're slightly different, but you know, it's similar vibes. Next slide, please. Ooh.
My Teams keeps crashing, so sorry. I'm going to just reshare it. Bear with me.
We'll see.
We can do some more Pink Floyd maybe.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So whilst I talk, I'm just going to cover some kind of 5 key things. Firstly, why it matters that we do this. I covered that quite well a minute ago, but I'll just go over that again. Second, things to look for, specifically the kind of wider determinants of mental health. Thirdly, I'm going to go through some of the key guidance that we found by reading loads of these reports and seeing some really good examples and some really not so good examples. And then I also had a chat with some practitioners, public health practitioners who have worked on really good examples. And I spoke to them about how they were able to have an impact with their work and also to get a sense for the challenges they face. So I'm going to kind of reiterate that to you guys now. we're having trouble. I can try and wing it without them. We'll keep pushing for it. Okay, we're good. So why does it matter that we do this? Firstly, it is really important to get a sense of what the local community needs, what the priorities are for the local community. People live in different places and are often the product of the places that they live. And so it's vital that we understand A, who's living somewhere, and B, what that area provides for them and can't provide for them. And as we've talked about already a lot today, the community is so important in both protecting people's mental health and when it goes wrong, harming people's mental health. So it's important to have a local understanding. It also ensures a parity of esteem by focusing on mental health. It means that we can provide support for mental health and not get it lost in a broader institutional stuff. And finally, it provides an evidence base to show that all policies can affect our mental health. Everything from public transport to the trees in our parks, everything affects it. And so by doing this work, we can provide an evidence base towards that effect. So the reason we're updating our guidance is we want to provide you guys with a pathway to impact. We want to show that you can get from this sort of big, massive report on the area and then kind of see tangible changes in people's lives. We want to also reiterate the importance of alliance building, getting people together like we have here to build these relationships and to kind of improve the way that we can implement real change. And finally, since Andy wrote his amazing report in 2016, things have changed quite a lot. I mean, 2020 is something that comes to mind. And so we just want to be able to address these new challenges that mental health might face. Next slide, please. So we're going to quickly go over this because I think we've covered it quite well today already, but essentially kind of highlighting the fact that we have all these different factors that can both be protective and also harmful for our mental health. Things such as wealth, discrimination, childhood experiences, housing, all these stuff, especially the way that we connect in our communities. And so it's important to consider the risk and protective factors in an environment when producing these documents, because that gives you a much more holistic and comprehensive understanding of how people's mental health might be affected. So as I say, Andy's done a really good job already, and I'm not going to repeat everything. Well, I am going to repeat a little bit now, but I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to cover some of the things that still hold true today. So first point is to find a champion in the local community, someone that will take the work you've done and propagate it and make the case for it. It's all very well standing kind of writing this document and sending it off into the ether, but unless there's someone in the council to make the case for your work, it's going to get lost. It's important to engage stakeholders, be they people of lived experience, health professionals, councillors, council officers, or even people beyond the kind of health sphere, but involved in things that matter. For example, public transport experts. All these people are important to involve in the process. Be imaginative with your sources. I think we talked earlier about qualitative data. You know, everyone's got a story to tell. Those stories are valuable and vital, and we should definitely be including them in a mental health JSNA. To include voices of experience, as I just said, you know, you've got these amazing stories that can produce a compelling and human narrative to this work. It kind of supersedes the relatively dry data side of it and makes it much more compelling and kind of really illustrates the point of how important these things are. It's important to have a clear presentation, make it easy to read, easy to see, just make everything as easy as possible. You want it to make it as easy as possible because we've all read boring documents that we can't remember anything about, and it's important to make it visually engaging and exciting to be a part of. And finally, it's so important to monitor the outcomes. It's all very well sitting here and talking about solutions to these problems, but if we just throw them out into the ether and never think about them again, we will never know if it would worked. So what we need to do is need to have recommendations for solutions to these challenges, and then we need to see what happens once we implement them and see if it was effective, and if not, go back to the drawing board and keep working to make things better. Okay, so what makes a good mental health needs assessment? And this is based broadly off of the documents I've read in the past 4 years, which is a bit more up to date. And it's a lot of repeating the same kind of points, which is good to know. This advice isn't out of date. So again, you need local and up-to-date data. You need to be looking at the local picture and considering the communities you're working with. You need to include non-medical data, not just statutory services, but also things about parks in the area or public transport routes, all these kind of things that are incredibly relevant to the broader picture. You need to think about data about service provision, not just referral rates, but also how effective those services are. Like, you know, do we have any re-referrals? Do we have people completing their time in the services? Do we see recovery rate? All these things indicate not just what provisions are there, but how effective they are. we need clear and consistent and appealing visualizations. It's important that these visualizations don't change color schemes suddenly. Ideally, what you want is someone to be able to look at a graph and know what it means straight away. That's the most effective way to send a message to someone who isn't going to read the whole document, it's just going to flick through. Again, voices of experience. I think we've heard a lot about that today, but it's worth reiterating. It's so important. And no assumed knowledge. The people reading this document may not be a public health expert, almost certainly not in some cases. And so you don't want to assume that people know what you're talking about. You want to make sure that everything is explained. There's no unexplained acronyms, no unexplained terms. Make it as accessible and as easy as possible. I think that's my main take-home message from all this. And then clear recommendations. We want to have measurable and clearly defined recommendations, something that people can implement and know what it means to implement. And finally, modularity. And this is kind of one of the biggest innovations that I found, that people have started to look at this as more of a collection of smaller projects, a collection of data for certain kind of topics that then people with certain portfolios can look at and find the information relevant to them. It's a lot harder to read a whole document full of information. It can be kind of impenetrable. It's much better to be able to look for specific pieces of advice. And that means it's much more, again, easy and fun to use. I'm going to kind of skip through this a bit quickly, so I think I'm running a bit short on time. But next slide, please. Essentially, as I said, I had conversations with these people, and we got some really cool themes that emerged, looking at, well, five key ones emerged. I'm just going to skip through them on this slide, and then we'll stay on this one, then we'll skip through the next ones. So firstly, it's important to have context in mind. So a lot of people talked about how there's a commissioning cycle and that they targeted their JSNAs for when this commissioning was about to renew. And by doing so, you could have recommendations that were going to be adopted by a commissioner. You could target it for that moment in time. And it was super effective at kind of making these recommendations become reality because people were receptive to it and they were ready for them. And that kind of context is super important. Again, it's important to have an interactive and future-proof mental health needs assessment. It's about being able to update it regularly when new data comes to light. Don't kind of just leave it behind and leave it to disappear into the wilderness forever. You want to keep it going, keep it updating. So having some form of live document or online dashboard can be really helpful with that. It's important to have a community around you, engage stakeholders from the start, get a steering group together with health professionals, with counsellors, with people with lived experience. All of these people are so vital to steering you in the right direction and tackling the things that matter most. And it's important to have relevant and recent data. Don't use data that's 5, 6, 7 years out of date, because that won't tackle COVID or the cost of living crisis, which is going to have a massive impact in our mental health and is continuing to have a massive impact in our mental health. So all of these things are super important to bear in mind when you're producing these documents. You want to try and overcome any barriers that could be challenging you from incorporating these things. I'm going to stop there so I don't keep whittering on about bureaucracy, but thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be around at the end of the session. So please come by me.
Well, thanks very much, Callum. And as you were reading that, I'm just finishing the Birmingham and Solihull, the first draft joint strategic needs assessment, which Callum and others have been working on as well. And just seeing that list, I'm like, have I remembered to do all the things in our own guidance? And I'm not sure that I've done all of them. So I'm going to go back and make sure as I'm working on the last draft that I'm incorporating all of our own advice, because that would be bad not to follow our own advice. But thank you so much. That's fantastic work. Drawing on Andy's great original work and then taking it forward. It's just part of the brilliant contribution you've made to Centre for Mental Health. So we're all really grateful for you and the amazing contribution that you have made. So fantastic. So the next thing, I'm hoping my colleagues are going to tell me Gilla is online. There she is.
I am. Hello.
Hi, Gilla. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Hi. Fantastic to see you. Are you speaking live from Stockport?
Well, I'm in South Manchester, yes.
We'll take that. It's near enough. So Gilla, I first came across Gilla when she was a public health professional in the Greater Manchester Borough of Trafford, and Centre for Mental Health have been working in Greater Manchester, commissioned by the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. For over 2 years, we worked on trying to tackle mental health inequalities and worked really closely with the 10 boroughs there, including Trafford. And what we did was we said, we're Centre for Mental Health, we're quite good at this, that, and the other. Is there anything that we could help you with, Greater Manchester boroughs? And some of them came back and said, oh, we're doing this or that, and you could maybe help with this or that. And Gilla said, could we do complex system mapping? And I said, well, I've never done complex system mapping. How complex can it be with a name like that? I'm sure it's very straightforward. But Gilla put me onto a paper, the lead writer of which was Dr. Jude Stansfield, who we just heard of. So basically, this whole meeting is just people I've bumped into over the last couple of years. And it's no worse for that, I don't. And I read the paper Gilla sent me of Jude Stansfield et al. And I thought, yeah, we can turn that into a workshop. And it wasn't long after lockdown, was it, Gilla? And people were desperate to have real life meetings. So we had a packed, wonderful meeting in Trafford, and local people came out, and we got loads of post-it notes, and it was kind of chaotic, but kind of in an organised way. And it was brilliant, actually. I really enjoyed it. And we produced, I think, a fantastic complex system map of the factors in Trafford, and wrote a very nice report. And I think it's gone on to be influential in Trafford, and it went to their Health and Wellbeing Board and has helped influence policy and commissioning decisions there. And it was so good that other Greater Manchester boroughs copied it. So we've now done them in Wigan, Bury, and Rochdale. So that's exciting. And then I've been using it as an approach in Birmingham and Solihull as well. So Gilla, you've started a whole trend of complex system mapping around mental health in local government. So well done.
I didn't even realise that.
Oh, no, that's good. You see, you've inspired a whole line of work. And as is a normal career progression, when people work with us, Gilla got a huge promotion and is now the Director of Public Health. This is how it works, everybody. In the nearby Greater Manchester borough of Stockport. So I thought, a year into the job, is it a year?
It is. It's just gone a year. Yes.
Well, you were so transformative in Trafford. I'm sure you've managed to fix everything that may have been a challenge in Stockport. And I thought, let's hear from Gilla about how you've managed to sort all the mental health issues out in Stockport. So thanks very much. We look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you.
Yes, we've sorted it all. We did our JSNA, we did our complex system mapping, and there are no longer any mental health issues. There's a clue, isn't there, in the name complex system mapping. It is very complex, and I like the way you describe it as somewhat organised chaos. And you're absolutely right. It was at that time, as we were emerging from the pandemic, when we were quite giddy with the possibility of a mass gathering, of coming together physically in a room. But what that meant was that there was tremendous energy, actually, and a real buzz, which was a huge asset to the work. So yes, great intro. Thank you, Ed, and hi everybody in the room and online. What I'm going to try and do is talk a little bit about that system mapping work that we did in Trafford, and then a little bit about the approach that we've taken in Stockport. And I think what's similar in both of these cases is that we have absolutely recognised that mental health is a complex system, that the inequalities we see in mental health outcomes, which are clearly widening, are largely driven by those core determinants of health, and the socioeconomic ones in particular. And so we've tried to bring all of those system partners together, I guess in different approaches in both of these boroughs, to take that whole system approach. So if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to start with the approach we've taken in Stockport, and then I'm going to move on to Trafford. It will be very high level because I know I don't have very long, but very happy for people to reach out either with questions at the end or to contact me afterwards. Clearly, the backdrop here was not only the pandemic, but also the increasing cost of living and the increasing poverty that people have been experiencing. And during that time, I think it really prepared the ground for a new strategic approach. It felt like we had a real burning platform in Stockport. We could see that our mental health services weren't able to cope with the increasing demand. We could see those inequalities widening. So following Callum's advice, not directly, but we refreshed our mental health joint strategic needs assessment. I'm not sure, reflecting on the gold standard that you set us there, Callum, whether we actually met that, and perhaps I need to go back to that. And as you say, it absolutely has to be a live document. But just a few headlines there, really, which, you know, are really quite stark. We did some, it wasn't us in Stockport, it was the Be Well survey at Greater Manchester, looked at young people's mental health and well-being, and we found 1 in 5 of our young people were reporting low well-being, and we could see that anxiety had increased by nearly 1/3 and depression by 60%. So we needed to do things differently, and it was our locality board in Stockport that identified mental health and well-being as one of its key priorities and committed to develop a borough-wide all-age mental health and well-being strategy. Next slide, please. So I can give you a link to the summary, and if you're interested, you can take a look at the whole document. But I suppose just to say a bit about the process that was undertaken, and much of this happened before I joined, so I can't take any credit for it, but it was a really in-depth and inclusive and collaborative process with a great deal of engagement. We used our JSNA to identify what we felt were the key outcomes that we were looking to improve, and you can see them there. And then we identified 5 ambitions, and they're on the next slide. If you could just skip forward, please. So these are our 5 ambitions, and we've got ambition leads across the whole system that are really driving forward our work against each of these. So ambition 1, putting lived experience at the heart of what we do, and our ambition lead is our Director of Adult Social Care. And in that ambition, for example, we have really rejigged our governance around mental health, creating a new mental health partnership, which is co-chaired by someone with lived experience, and which now reports directly to the locality board. Ambition 2, embedding mental health in everything we do. I'm the lead for that. That covers things like work and mental health, whole school approaches to mental health, and also doing some work around integrated impact assessment and then taking mental health and well-being into consideration in the impact assessment work that we do, so that it's embedded in our policies right across the system. Then ambition 3 is around promoting awareness and understanding, and that's led by our Stockport Family Director, and that's all about training, awareness raising, and embedding a much better understanding using every contact account approaches and various training approaches. And then ambition 4 is working with our communities and our VCFSE sector to build the capacity. So, for example, we have funded a mental health network, and that ambition is led by the Chief Exec of our VCFSE infrastructure organisation in Stockport. And then finally, you would expect to see, obviously, mental health services, and that's ambition 5, led by our provider organisation. But what we've really endeavoured to do is try to avoid all of the energy getting sucked to that sharp end, and ensure that we do the upstream prevention work that will hopefully mean that our population doesn't need those mental health services at the level that they currently do. The next and final slide for the Stockport bit just gives you a little flavour of some of those mental health and wellbeing resources that we developed as part of Ambition 3. Those ambition leads meet regularly, and we report, as I say, directly up to the locality board, and monitor those outcomes that I outlined at the beginning. So that's the approach that we've taken in Stockport. And then, as Ed said, in Trafford, we did try something a little different, and we ran these workshops. So if you go to the next slide, it just gives a summary of what we did during the workshops. So in the first one, we literally created a map, a picture of all of the things that affect mental health and well-being across the borough. And actually we brought together a really broad range of partners and people that, you know, had never been together in the same room together to have, I think, really unique conversations about how each of their work was affecting one another and thereby affecting the mental health and well-being of the population. It helped us work out, when we could see it pictorially, where some of the gaps were, some of the opportunities, and we used that system map to design the follow-up workshop, which is where we kind of overlaid all of the existing interventions and services, but also some of the assets within the communities that support our mental health and well-being onto that map. And we heard firsthand about some of the pressures in the system. And one of the things that we wanted to do was ensure that this wasn't just a workshop delivered by the Centre for Mental Health and by the public health team, but we worked with those wider system partners to deliver the workshop. So, you know, we heard from someone in the planning team about how important the build to natural environment is to mental health and well-being. And we heard from housing partners, we heard about homelessness from that team, etc. So it was a real coming together of partners to think about this in a much more holistic way than I think we had done before. That led to us developing a range of actions across the whole system, focusing on how we could reduce those inequalities, how we could take a more preventative approach, improve access to services, and improve resident experiences. And if you go to the next slide, these were the broad categories that we started out with and on which we built our map. And then I think the next slide actually shows the map, which is a bit mind-boggling, and I am not going to try and explain it. And actually, you know, I suppose what it illustrates is not only the complexity, but all of the interconnectedness. But, you know, because we generated this in a really dynamic way in the room, and everybody was moving around the room for the entire workshop from table to table, there were countless conversations, and each of those links results from one of those conversations, and then people went away and made those contacts and really took forward some of the opportunities that they'd identified during the workshop. On the next slide, you have got some hyperlinks to the maps. We use some software called Kumu, and it's freely available, I think. So if you are interested in replicating this, you can take a look at the maps. You can have a little play. They are interactive, and you can dive into some of those nodes and look at some of those connections for yourselves. Next slide, please. So yeah, I think I've kind of covered this. It was really effective in bringing those partners together, helped us understand the system, the main drivers, with much more clarity. And as I say, we also heard from lived experience during that workshop as well. It really stimulated our thinking. We had those cross-disciplinary conversations and some really novel ideas about how we could intervene that wouldn't have come about, I don't think, without taking this approach. Next slide, please. So as I said, it generated a huge amount of ideas and actions. So we then went through a process of prioritisation. We didn't necessarily have the governance and the structures in place to take forward all of the actions. Wherever we could, we plugged them into the existing governance. I have to say that was quite an onerous task, but really important to do that rather than set up something new where those forums already exist. And then the next step was to feed those into the development of an all-age mental health strategy, which would be overseen by the Health and Wellbeing Board in Trafford. And at that point I left. So I think there's one final slide there with some key learning and next steps. I think I'll probably leave it there, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gilla. That's really fascinating. Obviously, I'm more familiar with the Trafford stuff, but really interesting to see what you've done in Stockport in the just a year that you've been there. I'd like you say some of it predated you being there, but fabulous to see that taking that forward. And yeah, I mean, it just reminded me again, like I did my public health masters around the corner at King's, and my dissertation was on community conversation work, a bit like this, but with Thrive London that we did in 15 London boroughs. And my dissertation was on going back to the people who participated in those conversations and asking them basically what, if anything, came out of that work. And kind of the main success of it was the spontaneous kind of relationships that are created in the conversations like that you just talked about, that you can't really legislate for. And I remember talking to the public health consultant in Hackney who'd been part of that conversation, and he said they'd really struggled to get good take-up of increasing access to psychological therapies amongst the Jewish population in Hackney. But at that community conversation we had, there was a leader from the Jewish community. They had a conversation and they managed to really increase the uptake by, promoting it through those kind of channels. And then my other favourite example from Hackney was lots of people said they wanted free community space where they could just go and hang out with people. And so this public health consultant went and changed Hackney's planning guidance and challenged his own council's plans for a new leisure centre at the planning committee and said, oh, you've got to put free pro-social space into the building so that people can just go along and sit and play dominoes, chat. And they changed the building plans, and the Britannia Leisure Centre, which is now built, has this room in it that you can use. Is literally a concrete example. Mostly the word literally is misused, but in this case it's true. And that just came out of the community conversation, which you could never have kind of guessed would be an outcome, but is now benefiting people in Hackney by having this space. So part of the process is just having facilitating conversations between different groups of people who wouldn't necessarily normally talk to each other about mental health, and making them realise what they do in planning or parks or leisure or whatever it is impacts people's mental health. And if they work together, they can improve and increase that impact. And we call it a complex system because we're public health people. We love kind of the jargon of it, the bureaucracy of it and the diagrams. But in the end, it's about facilitating conversations between people and getting them to work towards a common aim a bit more effectively. And I think that's done that. And it's great to see that that's the outcome in Trafford and now taking it on in Stockport. And it's a huge privilege to work in Greater Manchester. Lots of very exciting things going on and great people working there. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for Gilla about any of that. Anyone online? Or yes.
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry, Gilla. Right at the beginning of COVID, Professor Kevin Fenton was asked to investigate why the pandemic was impacting certain communities, particularly around Black African heritage. And there's a lack of trust in the system through the NHS, through councils, from the top-down approach. I'd be interested to learn from what you're saying, just briefly, of how you built that trust back into the system, because it seems you've done it, but you didn't really sort of touch how it was done. There's a lot of partners involved, some community voices, but it's how do you build that trust back in to listen to what people above are saying?
Oh, thanks for that question. Yeah, I think it's about building bridges and relationships and working with community leaders and trusted individuals. I think if you come into a community as an expert, as an unknown figure, or as a representative of the council or the NHS, then you're going to come across, barriers which are absolutely understandable. But I think that if one of the things, that really came out of the pandemic was that kind of uprising of community mobilization, the establishment of those community champions, and that grassroots activism just came to the fore. And certainly my experience in Trafford was, we had to step up very quickly, a community engagement team where we didn't have that capacity before, and we relied really heavily on the network of community hubs and organisations, community leaders, including faith leaders, and reaching out to all of the communities that were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And we had that open dialogue, and I think it was maybe somewhat levelling because we were all uncertain, we were all fearful, and we were all trying to help those communities in the best way that we could, given that context. What I'm hoping is, that some of the legacy of that can now be retained, and I am certainly seeing that. So certainly in Trafford, for example, those community hubs, even though they were set up for COVID, we found them so valuable in terms of maintaining those trusting links with communities, that when the cost of living crisis came along, we pivoted in terms of the focus of those hubs, and they're still going. We found ways to sustain them, and they are supporting our communities where the needs are greatest, not just in terms of health, but in terms of poverty as well.
And just reflecting on that, I used to be a counsellor with Jackie, who was here earlier, and one of the first bits of work we ever did together was on trying to improve mental health outcomes with our Black communities. And there was no point, as Gilla says, me from the council, white middle class guy, saying, "I'm here to fix your problems," because that's deeply inappropriate and wouldn't work at all. But I happened to bump into a guy in Brockwell Park doing kind of health and fitness with predominantly young Black men, and I got chatting to him, and he was called Terrell Lewis, and he's got a huge vlog if you want to look up Terrell Lewis. And he'd been in prison and found exercise and brought exercise out into his housing estate, and then become this very successful kind of fitness guy. And we got him to bring down a load of the guys that he worked with to come and co-produce, I hope in the best possible way, recommendations for a report that, among other things, led to the creation of Black Thrive and things like that. And it was by sort of working with him rather than someone like me, we created some trust, we got some buy-in from the local community, we could use their insights appropriately and empower people who then had a bit more trust. Oh, these people actually are listening to us and they're responding, and people like Jackie are then taking it forward. And we used a bit of our privilege and power to work with them to extend that, and built a little bit of, we didn't fix every problem, but I think we've made some advances because of that. Anyway, thank you so much, Gilla. Fantastic, great to see you, and looking forward to year 2 of Gilla's Stockport Director of Public Health journey, and it'd be great to bring all the stuff that we've done in Greater Manchester together, because we're nearly finished on the Wigan and Rochdale parts, and then I think we should bring it all together and have a Greater Manchester event where we share the learning of what we've achieved in your next.
I think that sounds fantastic, and I'm really interested to hear about how the system mapping has gone in the other boroughs.
Sure, not as good as Trafford, the original.
Obviously.
So fantastic. Thanks so much, Gilla. So moving on to what I think is our last speaker, Louise from the Health Foundation. A word from our sponsor in the old-fashioned language. So Health Foundation, as I'm sure Louise will explain, is a fantastic charitable foundation that does brilliant public health work. And we got chatting some time ago. I think I was at a thing at the Local Government Association conference, and Health Foundation very interested to work and understand more and be able to support local government more. And Centre for Mental Health had our local government mental health challenge, and so we've come together to refresh that, and that's what the Mentally Healthier Councils Network is, and sort of broaden it out to officers as well as councillors. And they put some support into that, and we're very grateful for that support. But they also do lots of their own fascinating and stuff. And so, Louise is going to share some of the things that hopefully this audience will find.
Thank you, Ed, and a huge thank you for the invite to be here today. A huge thank you for all your amazing work on this network. It's fantastic that it's nearly up to 300, so close. And we're really delighted to be supporting it. Just to join another of your dots, I'm Louise. I'm a public health consultant and senior fellow at the Health Foundation, and I'm one of the et als on the paper by Jude and others. So we worked with Jude in her role at PHE back before the pandemic, doing some of the systems mapping. We were very interested in systems that determine mental health in children and young people, first of all, and did some systems mapping with a group of professionals and also with a group of young people, and it was really interesting looking at those together, and then went on to do the work looking at the role of Public Health England as a whole in mental health and how they can sort of complex system where they have influence. And it really fascinated to hear Gilla's presentation as we started working with a couple of local authorities to do some of that systems mapping. And I say started, we did it in January, February 2020. So by the time we were supposed to go back and do those second sessions, we all know where we were. But despite that, I can really echo the value of doing that and bringing people together and the buzz and the conversations in the room. And even despite the fact that this was kind of called a very dramatic halt and everyone in the councils was then very focused obviously on the pandemic come March that year, speaking to people a couple of years down the line, actually just some of those conversations that happened and what they triggered and some of the relationships that had developed was really great to hear. But anyway, I will get back on track. Ed has asked me just to talk a bit about our work at Health Foundation for local government and some of our resources and things that are available for local government, which I will try and do without sounding like a salesperson. Can we just have the next slide, please? So we are an independent charity. We're committed to bringing about better health and healthcare for people in the UK. We're UK-wide. The work of the part of the organisation I sit within is focused on creating health and creating health as an asset for society, and in particular, where health is most unequal. And where I talk about health, I do so in the broadest sense, meaning the physical and mental health and well-being. So we're an endowed charity. We're the second largest foundation in the UK focused on health after Wellcome. And we operate by making grants, we fund research, and we also produce our own work internally. So this is just an example of some of the sorts of things that we do and publish. We think of ourselves really, I think our chief exec was saying at our Way Day last week, as a think tank, but also a do tank. And what we want to do is connect what works in practice, including through work that we have funded local areas to be doing, with effective policy making and vice versa. So it's a two-way relationship. We work to spread knowledge on the case for change, as well as the action that's needed and about what works. And we do this to influence policymakers, but also to support local change. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So our work is underpinned by a focus on these building blocks of health, all of these things that help us to be healthy and to stay healthy. And these are often called the social determinants of health or the wider determinants of health, and we like building blocks. So I'm not going to show you many charts, but this one from our online evidence hub really just in one slide shows why we do this work. It shows how many years, so in the blue there, how many years people can expect to live, males and females, in Great Britain, based on how deprived the neighbourhoods they were born in is. So you can see there's a really strong gradient here in both men and women, that we live longer in the least deprived neighbourhoods. And in the red, that shows how many years we can expect to live in good health. So there's an even stronger gradient. So currently in the UK, for far too many people, lives are being cut short, and people are living more of their lives in ill health because of the social and economic circumstances of their lives. So these inequalities are stark, and there are many reasons that they exist and that they persist. One contributing reason is that when we don't have the things that we need, like warm homes or healthy food, and we're constantly worrying about making ends meet, then this chronic stress puts a strain on our mental health and on our physical health. And, you know, ultimately we live shorter lives as a result. So next one, please. Just a couple of examples. I said I'm not putting up loads of charts. These are all from our evidence hub, though, which is an online resource with lots of data around health, around inequalities, and around these building blocks of health. So just to illustrate that, this is showing, you know, you are experiencing problem debt. There are much higher levels of high and medium anxiety than people who aren't experiencing debt. And the next one, please. And again, it feels obvious, but adults living in overcrowding homes tend to have worse mental health. And in the red there, those are the overcrowded households. And this is the percentage of people who are experiencing psychological distress. So all of these building blocks impact our mental health and our physical health very directly. Next, please. So back to our building blocks. So in local government, and you as councillors, you hold many of the levers to strengthen these building blocks that support good health for all of your residents. And through our work, we want to support you to be able to do that. So in my remaining time, I will just take you through some of the ways we do this at Health Foundation and signpost some of our resources, which are all freely available. And I can share some links via Beth following the session. So next, please. So one of the first ways we do that, and one of the major ways we do that as a foundation, is direct support for local place-based action to improve health. So this just describes 3 of our current funding programmes. So Shaping Places for Healthier Lives, actually, that's all about complex systems, and that's about local government as leaders of these complex systems in their places for improving health and reducing inequality. So we're funding 5 partnerships, looking at very different things. So 3 are focused on food insecurity. 1 is looking at, well, actually the other 2 are very aligned, and Andy very kindly on our advisory group for the programme. And they're very much looking at mental health and community relationships and community development, and really building this trust and engagement in communities. Economies for Healthier Lives is building consideration of health into local economic and inclusive growth. The final one there is our Combined Authorities programme, where we're working across a number of combined authorities, most directly with through West Midlands, also the GLA involved, to think about how we can factor health into devolution more explicitly, and the role of combined authorities and the levers they hold in improving health and reducing inequalities. So the first two of these are due to finish in the autumn, and we'll be sharing learning, and you can sign up to we do a kind of local government newsletter roundup, which will share some of the learning from those programs. So that's one example of kind of how we operate. So the next slide, please. So secondly, this is about sort of helping others make the case for improving health and reducing inequalities. The first resource here is a resource that has been hugely popular, and this is about supporting people to make the effective case for action on the wider determinants. So you've heard me talk about building blocks. That's come out of this research. So we know that when we think about health and when we think about inequalities, we see the individual. We don't see the systems that we live in. We don't see the wider determinants and how the context of our life impacts our health. So, this is one of the many reasons why so much of our policy about health is focusing on encouraging individuals to act and individuals to change their behaviour rather than changing these systems of determinants. So we did some research which surfaced all of that, and have done some work with an organisation called Frameworks to develop evidence-based ways to talk about the wider determinants of health, to talk about how they impact our physical and mental health and result in inequalities, and make that kind of stronger case for action at population level, which we know is most effective in reducing inequalities. Second one here I thought you might be interested in. This is some research that we funded the Institute for Fiscal Studies to do, looking at allocations of funding. So I heard you ask about fair allocation of funding, and looking at how allocation of funding to local places, so that was local government and police, and something else might have been the NHS. Sorry, just trying to remember and refer to my notes and find where I'm up to, because I've gone completely off track. But sort of total funding into local areas, how that matches up to what the IFS estimated to be need in that area based on the population structure and based on deprivation. And what it found really was that actually the most deprived areas were relatively underfunded, and the least deprived areas were relatively overfunded, and that was largely because of the allocation to local government, but policing as well, we found. Then I mentioned our evidence hub. We've recently launched a dashboard for local authorities. So you can go on there and you can filter it by local authority and look at evidence on the wider determinants of health, look at evidence on health and inequalities in local areas. And then I mentioned this last one, which is some research that our Real Centre has been doing with the University of Liverpool to look at health projected forward into 2040, which is really helpful, I think, in supporting that longer term thinking about health and longer term decision making. And that really has, shown again the huge inequalities in health, and anxiety and depression being one of the leading conditions contributing now to health at this stage, but actually one of the major contributors to some of the growth in ill health and inequalities in ill health right forward to 2040. And I know Liverpool have done a sort of local version of some of that analysis, and the Director of Public Health has based a report on health in Liverpool in 2040. And I know that they've found that very helpful in kind of thinking longer term and making that case longer term for action. So next, please. Thank you. And so another way is how we both develop and sort of share as well evidence-based ideas and support the sharing of ideas for local action to improve health for all. This is very much where this council, councillors network sit. And, it's great to see you all coming together and sharing your learning, and we're really delighted to support that. We have a sort of number of other ways we do that. I won't go through them in a lot of detail, but I would like to flag that explainers and infographics, and I've got a pile of hot off the press copies of our explainer on the wider terms or building blocks of health that I would love for you to take, so I don't have to carry them all the way back to Oxford tonight. Another thing that's been really popular is, I think Ed mentioned sort of action on kind of commercial determinants and risk factors, which are obviously huge drivers of poor physical and mental health, is that we've developed a kind of framework for local government action across kind of planning and other levers. But yeah, do please take a quick guide. And we've also got lots of infographics that take a kind of deeper dive into all of those building blocks that I put up in the slide earlier. And like, feel free to download everything, lift everything, you know, whatever is useful. It's all completely free. So next one, please. And talked earlier about sort of advocacy at national level, and that's very much a lot of what we do. We've got an external reference group who help shape our work on local government, and you know, in all of our pieces of work, we work very closely with people who are kind of working on the ground, if you like. I don't really like that term, but I can't think of a better one right now. And these are some examples. So this report on prevention and how the next government can take this from sort of rhetoric into reality. You know, we've talked for many years about the need for prevention, but not doing it very well. You know, a lot of that is around how local government can support and enable the role of local governments, including through fairer and better funding. And I mentioned our work on a framework for action on the risk factors for ill health, and this accompanying report is focused at what central government needs to do to enable local. So we're really keen to listen and to understand how we can kind of speak to central government about what you need at local level to be able to improve health and tackle inequalities. Yeah, we sort of respond to consultations and things and get invited to speak to committees and things. So it's a great opportunity to be able to sort of make that link between our national and local focused work. Next one, please. I think we're nearly there. Just a few other things that may be of interest. Particularly, I'll highlight our Commission for Healthier Working Lives, because that's looking a lot into, you know, we've talked about the mental health crisis and how that's playing out in our working age population. They're doing a lot of research into that. Also, we're funding research into emotional support for young people and how that forms part of the kind of wider chance of health. And that should be, there's a number of research projects that we'll be finishing up sort of later this year, and we'll publish some of that. So again, you can sign up to receive roundups. I'll send any links to any of this, and I think we're nearly at the end. Next one, please. Thank you. Yes, a huge thank you. And again, you know, thank you all for listening, for being here, for being part of this fantastic network, and huge thank you to Ed and Beth and for all your amazing work to grow and sustain the network. We're delighted to support it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Louise, and the Health Foundation, both for the excellent presentation, all of those amazing resources which are freely available, and for supporting this network, which literally wouldn't be here without you. And yes, we've crept up to nearly 300. I think when we had our check-in meeting a few weeks ago, we were more or less at the same point. So my appeal to everyone who's still in this incredibly long but fascinating meeting is do share the links with all your colleagues to get them to join up. It takes seconds. It's free. It's amazing in every conceivable way. And we need to get over 300, I think, is the main outcome among others from this evening. Would be fantastic. So yes, we've been going a year. And we've done some great things. As we've said, we've had now 9, as of today, regional events in the 9 regions of England. We've recruited nearly 3 people in well over 100, I want to say, councils. Oh, okay. When I say well over, I mean just under. It's the ex-journalist in me. Sorry about that. So yeah, close to 100 councils, which is amazing. And Bethan puts together a fantastic monthly e-newsletter, and I know, having been a councillor myself, you don't get enough emails, and so you need more emails in your inbox, and this one's great, and fantastic information every month that we gather from all different sources. And we do great events like this. And I think as long as it has been, I've found it fascinating. We've had some fantastic range of different people in all kinds of different disciplines from all over the country. And I think it demonstrates again the kind of the richness of all the different things that affect mental health and the importance of local government in anchoring that. One of our sort of catchphrases is that mental health is made in communities, and local government is so important in many ways, but as a kind of bridge between people's everyday lives and the state in the broadest sense. And it's kind of the closest bits to people's lived experience, and ordinary people like me and Jackie and Gavin and others are elected councillors or have been elected councillors, and I think we need to kind of harness that closeness and make it even more effective, where we're able to kind of share good practice and experience and data and approaches amongst ourselves, because as others have said, there's so much innovation and amazing work that goes on even in really challenging times, that we need to make the best and be more than a sum of our parts, if you see what I mean. And the network helps us to do that. So do help us to recruit more people. And in the next year, some of the things that we'll be doing is we want to write a kind of 100 best mentally healthier council policies. Doesn't have to be 100. I'm plucking that figure out of the air. But we'd love to hear from you in your council if there's a policy that you're proud of that benefits or supports mental health. It doesn't have to be a mental health service. It could be an anti-poverty or traffic reduction or green space, planting or housing, the building blocks of good mental health. We want to hear about that if you're particularly proud of one or more of the policies that your council is putting forward. And we'd love to put that in that document and share it with others so that others can learn how great you are, where you are, and to maybe copy it, because there's no shame in that. And we're also developing a kind of accreditation scheme where we want to be able to give councils the kudos of being a kind of registered mentally healthier council network, with kind of 10 or so metrics. I was writing some down as we were talking. I think one of them is that you have to have a recent-ish and mental health joint strategic needs assessment, for example, and things like involvement in the patient carer race equality framework could be another one. Being living wage accredited, as Ron said, we can't expect children to have good mental health if they can't even have access to decent food and shelter, for example, and councils and everyone else shouldn't be paying poverty wages. So that feels like a fairly obvious one to me. But there are others, and I'd love to hear if you've got ideas for what should be on that list. I'd love to hear from you. So do get in touch about that or anything else. And we're in touch with what we now have to call OHID, the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities. We've had colleagues who used to work for Public Health England. I still can't believe that we abolished our national public health body in the middle of a global pandemic, but there we are, we did. So now we live with the consequences of that in so many ways. I'll, you know, and I mean it sincerely, there's no disrespect to people at OHID who do their very best. And we've been talking to them about how we might continue the legacy of great work like the Prevention Concordat, which we've heard about earlier, which encourages councils and NHS bodies and others to kind of sign up to a set of principles that should commit them to doing things to prevent mental ill health, as well as supporting people who have got mental illnesses. So we're in talks with them about how we might support that process, and we're thinking how we can make it work with the Mentally Healthy Councils Network and maybe the accreditation scheme. Early days, but any ideas or support you can give to that, we'd love to hear from you. So do get in touch with us if you have any ideas about what you would like this network to do, or you've got a great policy you want us to highlight, or you've got something for the newsletter, or anything else at all that we can be of assistance to. We'd be very happy to help. You know, as you've heard from our work in Greater Manchester, we've also worked, talk about the West Midlands Combined Authority, with them on their mental health report that was independently chaired and was produced last year. We're doing this joint strategic needs assessment with Birmingham and Solihull and the London Borough of Greenwich. Well, I have to call it the Royal Borough of Greenwich, I beg your pardon. So there's lots of other direct work we can do with local authorities to assist them in their mental health work. So we'd love to hear from you if you've got any ideas for joint work like that as well. So that is 8 o'clock. I said it was a rubbish chair. And the main job of a chair, as Andy always says, is to finish on time. And I'm going to finish on time. So I'm really grateful to colleagues. Oh, it's so well, blue. I was doing so well. But I'm really grateful for colleagues, Bethan and Hannah in particular, for helping arrange. Really grateful to Southwark for hosting us. Really grateful to the Health Foundation for funding us. Really grateful to all of you for coming online and in real life. And really grateful to all the fantastic and diverse and brilliant range of speakers we had. Lisa?
About you mid-flow, just to say we also have some Thrive London leaflets, but we'll leave them over there with the other ones. So if people want to grab some on the way out, please do.
Yes, please do take literature so that these good people don't have to carry back to Oxford and other places. And yeah, have safe journeys. Enjoy your summer holidays if you're about to embark on those. And thanks so much, and do be in touch.
Sorry, I'm good to say hello. Not stop for 3 hours.
We use that.
Nice to meet you.
Meet you, thank you.
It's really beneficial.
Yeah, no, I
Current administration has taken them out. We've seen.
People are
Already
a bit
the
intimidated by it, but it's a lovely audience. It's pretty nice.
Engaging.
Oh,
When we were like,
Because I really have to.
It's nice, like, to have you in the room.
That went quite well in the end, actually. It was
So much.
So they just
yeah,
went.
I think I'm
I essentially.
Like, it's fine. No,
I don't think it's gonna be that
amazing.
big issue.
Thank you so much for your help.
I want to
European.
get out from two and so
We haven't got
I'm now in sort of
schedule. Diary just for the session and everything.
Well, they-
Jackie is one of the really but she now
No, we'll do. Thank you so much.
Health Foundation.
Yeah.
with that.
How do I can.
It's not so boroughs.
Yeah.
Get them.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that I was just staring at you earlier. I was like, I know you about context.
I'm too far away. Thank you very much.
Touch shift with the